There is a quiet pattern inside you, one that has repeated itself for years without ever being questioned. It doesn't come with warnings, alarms, or dramatic moments. It moves slowly, subtly, like a shadow that adjusts itself every time you grow, every time you try to change, every time you take a single step toward becoming someone better. And because it moves slowly, because it hides behind normal days, because it blends with your habits, you never recognize it as the enemy it actually is. This pattern is self-sabotage, a cycle you don't choose consciously, yet follow consistently. And the most painful part is that you know it's there, not in clear words, but in a quiet, heavy feeling that shows up right before you're about to do something meaningful. A discomfort that appears at the exact moment your future attempts to open a door. A resistance that feels like laziness, procrastination, fear, or distraction. But in truth, it's none of these. It is something deeper. The belief that you're not meant to become the person you're trying to be. You've tried to change before. You've tried routines, habits, promises, goals, and new beginnings. You've tried waking up earlier, training harder, reading more, eating better, focusing longer. But every time you push forward, something inside pulls backward. And that pull is not random. It is a mechanism your mind built over years of repeating the same identity. The version of you that doesn't stay consistent, doesn't stay disciplined, doesn't complete what it starts. The version of you that you quietly accepted. Self-sabotage is not a force that tries to destroy your life from the outside. It's a story you've repeated so many times internally that your mind now protects it as if it were the truth. If you've ever wondered why you destroy your own progress, why you quit right when things start improving, why you avoid the things you know would make your life better, the answer is brutally simple. You are more familiar with your limitations than with your potential. You trust your old patterns more than your new intentions. You feel safer failing the way you always failed than succeeding in a way you've never experienced. This is why you sabotage yourself. Not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, not because you're broken. You sabotage yourself because your mind chooses familiarity over transformation, even if that familiarity is destroying you. Every time you approach something that could improve your life, your mind quietly reminds you of every past failure, every abandoned attempt, every moment where you weren't strong enough. And without noticing, you step back. You avoid the discomfort. You delay the action. You choose what feels easy now instead of what brings strength later. You go back to the identity that feels safe, the one that expects little, demands little, and achieves little. This is the cycle running your life, and unless you understand where it comes from, it will follow you for the rest of your existence. But here's the truth you've avoided. Nothing in your life changes until you confront the part of you that keeps pulling you back. Self-sabotage only has power as long as you remain blind to it. The moment you bring awareness to the cycle is the moment you begin to break it. Self-sabotage doesn't begin with action. It begins with identity. Before you fail to stay disciplined, before you procrastinate, before you delay what matters, there is always a quiet sentence that passes unnoticed in the back of your mind. This is not who I am. And because you've repeated this sentence for years without speaking it out loud, it has shaped every decision you make. You don't ruin your progress because you are incapable. You ruin your progress because your mind is loyal to the person you used to be. The version of you that gave up, avoided effort, hid from discomfort, and never fully committed. The version of you that felt safer living inside limitations than stepping into responsibility. Your mind is not sabotaging you out of cruelty. It is sabotaging you out of protection. In its logic, anything unfamiliar is dangerous, even if the unfamiliar thing is your own improvement. Discipline feels dangerous. Change feels dangerous. Success feels dangerous. Not because they actually are, but because they don't match the identity you've reinforced for so long. When your actions begin to challenge your old self, the mind sends resistance disguised as excuses. Not today. You're tired. Start tomorrow. It's not the right moment. This is too hard. You're not ready. These thoughts don't appear because they are true. They appear because your old identity is fighting to survive. And this is the part most people never understand. Self-sabotage is not a moment of weakness. It is a psychological defense mechanism, a system built to keep you in the familiar, even if the familiar is destroying your potential. When you sabotage yourself, you're not failing. You're obeying. Obeying the version of you who believes you can't go further. The version of you who stands quietly every time you try to improve and whispers, "Don't forget who you really are." But who you really are is not a fact. It is a story. A story you learned from your past struggles, past disappointments, past failures, past wounds. A story that feels true because you lived it, but that loses all power the moment you stop identifying with it. Most people never grow because they think action comes first. It doesn't. Identity comes first. You can change your habits, your routines, your environment, your goals. But if your identity remains the same, you will always return to the version of yourself that feels most familiar. This is why your life changes for a week and then falls apart. Why your motivation lasts for days, not months. Why you start strong and finish nowhere. You are building a new life on top of an old identity, and the foundation collapses every time. You break the cycle of self-sabotage, not by forcing discipline, but by questioning the identity that resists it. When you understand that the voice pulling you backward is just an outdated version of yourself, you stop treating it as truth. And once that happens, something powerful begins. You gain the ability to step outside the cycle and see it for what it truly is. A habit of thinking, not a definition of who you can become. If you're still here, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. If you look closely at your life, you'll notice something strange. The moments when you sabotage yourself are not random. They follow a pattern so consistent that, once you see it clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. Self-sabotage always appears at the edge of growth. It shows up the moment you begin to step outside your comfort, the moment your actions threaten to reshape the identity you've held for years. And because your mind is built to prioritize safety over progress, it reacts to this change not with curiosity, but with resistance. Resistance disguised as hesitation, distraction, doubt, emotional fog, or sudden disinterest in what once mattered. Think of the times you were closest to improving something in your life. The day you finally had momentum. The day you felt capable, focused, determined. The day you believed change was possible. What happened right after? You slowed down. You skipped a day. You eased the pressure. You relaxed your standards. You told yourself it was fine, that you would continue tomorrow. But tomorrow never came in the same intensity. The fire faded. The momentum dissolved. And without noticing, you returned to the same place you were before. This is the silent architecture of self-sabotage, not dramatic failure, but quiet retreat. The mind interprets consistency as a threat because consistency leads to transformation, and transformation challenges the stories you've built about yourself. Stories like, "I'm not disciplined, I'm not capable, I always fail. I'm not the type of person who can change." These stories become prisons that feel like homes. They feel familiar, safe, predictable. And when your actions begin to contradict them, your mind intervenes to restore the narrative. It doesn't matter if the narrative is hurting you. What matters to the mind is that it remains untouched. This is why every time you get close to progress, something inside you suddenly loses interest. It's not lack of motivation. It's your identity defending itself. The part of you that spent years believing one version of who you are cannot accept a new version without conflict. And conflict, in your mind, feels dangerous. So your brain tries to resolve it by pulling you backward. Not through dramatic breakdowns, but through subtle, almost invisible decisions. Scrolling instead of working, resting instead of improving, delaying instead of acting. But here's the truth. The moment you become aware of this pattern, the pattern loses its control. Self-sabotage thrives in blindness. It needs you to act automatically, to follow its command without questioning it. The second you learn to pause and recognize the cycle, you create distance between yourself and the identity trying to hold you back. And in that distance, your first real opportunity for change appears. Before you break the cycle, you must see it operating in real time. Not after you fail, but the instant the resistance begins. When you feel the urge to stop, avoid, delay, or take it easy, that is the moment to pay attention. That is the moment when the old identity tries to survive. And if you notice it, truly notice it, you take your first step toward becoming someone new. The moment you notice the cycle happening in real time, something shifts inside you. It's subtle, quiet, almost fragile, but it's the beginning of freedom. Because awareness breaks automatic behavior. The mind can no longer operate in the dark once you've turned on the light. And when the light is on, every excuse, every distraction, every sudden lack of motivation appears for what it really is. A strategy your old identity uses to stay alive. Not truth, not logic, not weakness, just a pattern. When you see the pattern clearly, a strange thing happens. You no longer feel controlled by the urge to quit. You feel separate from it. You begin to observe it instead of obeying it. You feel the hesitation rising, but you don't immediately step back. You feel the discomfort increasing, but you no longer run from it. You feel the temptation to choose what's easy, but you no longer believe that easy is harmless. That small separation, just a few seconds of awareness, creates the foundation of personal discipline. Not the loud, motivational kind, the quiet, adult kind. The kind built on responsibility, not emotion. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline is about forcing yourself to do what you hate. They think discipline is about strength, intensity, willpower, or punishment. But real discipline is something else entirely. Real discipline is the ability to act independent of your emotional state. It is the decision to stay loyal to your future, not to your mood. It is choosing long-term strength over short-term comfort. And that choice begins the moment you stop identifying with the part of you that wants to escape. Self-sabotage is powerful only when you treat it as your voice. When you believe the thoughts telling you to stop are part of who you are. But when you observe them as habits, not truths, they lose authority. A thought like "start tomorrow" becomes just a thought, not a command. A feeling like "you're tired" becomes just a sensation, not a rule. The idea that you can't do this becomes a memory from your past, not a prophecy about your future. And when thoughts lose authority, your identity begins to shift. But here's the important part. The shift doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet, almost anticlimactic. That's because the biggest transformations often come disguised as small moments of presence. When you stop scrolling and return to your work for no dramatic reason. When you stand up and take one step instead of negotiating with yourself for an hour. When you choose discomfort over escape without overthinking. These micro decisions don't change your life instantly. They change you. And once you change, your life follows. Every time you choose presence over impulse, you weaken the old identity. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, you strengthen the new one. And every time you notice the urge to sabotage yourself and still move forward, you send a new message to your mind. I am not who I used to be. This is the quiet beginning of reinvention. Not loud, not dramatic, not motivational. Just a steady return to yourself, one choice at a time. If you look back at your life, you'll notice a painful truth. The person who has held you back the most has always been you, not your circumstances, not your past, not the people around you, you. The version of yourself that chose comfort over growth, distraction over effort, excuses over responsibility. But here is the part you've never allowed yourself to fully understand. If you were powerful enough to sabotage your life, you are powerful enough to rebuild it. The same mind that built the cycle can dismantle it. The same identity that kept you stuck can evolve. The same patterns that once controlled you can become the foundation for transformation. But this only becomes possible when you stop pretending the problem is outside you and finally confront the truth you've been avoiding. You are the architect of your own limitations. This realization can feel heavy at first, almost overwhelming. But if you sit with it long enough, you'll notice something else hidden beneath the discomfort: freedom. Because if you created the pattern, you are not trapped by it. If you built the identity that sabotages you, you can build a new one. And unlike your past attempts, this new version of you doesn't need motivation, inspiration, or perfect conditions. It needs honesty. Honest recognition of the ways you've betrayed your own potential. Honest awareness of how often you've stepped back when you needed to step forward. Honest acceptance that your life is a reflection of your choices, not your desires. And once this honesty becomes part of your daily awareness, something profound begins to happen. You stop treating discipline as something external, something you chase or force. You begin to treat discipline as a natural expression of the person you are becoming. You no longer need to feel ready. You no longer argue with yourself for hours. You no longer crumble under the first wave of discomfort. Instead, you develop a quiet faith in yourself, a belief that your actions mean something, that your choices shape your reality, that your future is built in the moments when no one is watching. This is the stage where self-sabotage loses its power. Not because the thoughts disappear, but because they no longer convince you. Not because the old identity vanishes, but because you stop following it. You begin to separate who you were from who you are becoming. You stop defining yourself by your past failures and start defining yourself by your present choices. And in that shift, in that small separation between the old story and the new action, a new self begins to form. A self built on awareness, not impulse. Intention, not habit. Strength, not avoidance. You won't become this person overnight. You won't break years of self-sabotage in a week. But every time you choose discipline over escape, you rewrite your identity. Every time you follow through on a promise to yourself, you weaken the old story. Every time you take one small action in the direction of your potential, you build a foundation your future self can stand on. This is how you stop sabotaging your life. Not by force, not by motivation, but by becoming someone who no longer seeks escape. Someone who no longer fears their own strength. Someone who is finally ready to take responsibility for who they choose to be. There comes a moment in every person's life when excuses stop sounding convincing, when the familiar patterns lose their comfort, and when the truth becomes too loud to ignore. A moment when you finally realize that no one is coming to save you. No new plan, no perfect morning routine, no sudden burst of motivation will rewrite the story you keep repeating. Only you can do that. And not through dramatic changes or impossible expectations, but through small, consistent acts of honesty with yourself. The truth is simple. The life you want will not appear out of desire. It will appear out of discipline. And discipline begins the moment you stop negotiating with your old self. For years, you've lived with a quiet conflict inside you, the tension between who you are and who you know you could become. That tension has been the silent weight on your chest every night, the frustration that rises every time you break another promise to yourself, the anger that appears when you see glimpses of your potential only to fall back into the same habits. But that tension wasn't meant to punish you. It was meant to guide you. It was the signal that your old self is too small for the life you keep imagining. And the reason you felt stuck is not because you're incapable, but because you've been trying to build a new life without letting go of the old one. The truth you've been avoiding is this: your future depends on the person you choose to be today, not the person you hope to be someday. And if you want to stop sabotaging your future, you must stop protecting your past. Let go of the version of yourself that thinks discipline is painful, that believes effort is suffering, that imagines consistency as something reserved for people stronger than you. Because none of that is true. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is self-respect. Effort is not suffering. Effort is investment. And consistency is not for the strongest. It's for the honest. Those who admit they have something worth building. There will still be days when self-sabotage whispers in your ear, telling you to slow down, avoid the hard things, take the easy road. You will still feel resistance. You will still face moments of doubt. That won't disappear. But your relationship with these impulses changes the moment you stop treating them as commands. You learn to see them as remnants of an identity you no longer want to live in. You feel them, acknowledge them, but you do not follow them. And that is the difference between the person you've been and the person you are becoming. You won't rebuild your life all at once. You will rebuild it through the quiet, daily decision to stop stepping backward, through the small moments where you act with intention instead of impulse, through the times when you choose presence over distraction, through each commitment kept, each cycle broken, each step forward even when it feels insignificant. This is how real change happens, not through sudden transformation, but through the slow, deliberate construction of a new identity. You don't need perfection to start. You don't need confidence to begin. You just need to make one decision today, to stop being the person who sabotages their own life and start becoming the person who finally takes responsibility for it. If this message spoke to you, subscribe, leave a comment, and like the video. Your support helps this community grow, and the next video continues your path.